Welcome back, everybody. Assuming that there are some of you that are here for the first part of this. However, if you were not here for the first part one of the successful interview, no worries, because the information is all in a Dropbox folder that actually I just updated about 30 seconds ago with some additional interview questions, some of which are specific to being an assistant director or specific to being just a general teacher at a middle school or high school level. So for those of you that I might not have met yet, my name is Frank Troika, and I am a senior education consultant with Conn-Selmer, and I am thrilled to get to share some thoughts with you about how to pursue the interview. So this is all about the interview itself. And I'd like to tell you that it doesn't have to be as scary as some people might think. Now, being a little bit nervous for an interview makes perfect sense because, you're competing for a position. You're competing for an opportunity to change your life, basically. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to re-plug in here. Dang it, I was hoping to go a full day without a technical mishap. So hopefully that will be the only one. But the interview does not have to be the Inquisition. And I think if you prepare for it, you can go into it feeling good about what you have to offer and understand that it's not so much like being desperate for the job as it is looking for the right fit. Sometimes I can tell you there are times when I pursued a job and didn't get it, and I thought it was the end of the world. And at the moment, it felt like it, but fortunately for me, the opportunities I missed opened doors elsewhere. So I want to talk a little bit about your initial impression. And if we were in person, I could read your body language, I could see your faces, and you could see me in a more personal environment. We would have a different relationship than this format actually allows. So what I'm going to share with you are things that could easily be interpreted as kind of restrictive or I don't want to say biased, but I guess you could make a case for it. You might recall that in part one, I mentioned about your online presence and how important it is to consider what people see when they look for you on social media platforms. And that's the reality of it. It's true. And it's a sensitive subject to try to address because it's so you don't want to offend anybody. And I have such a love for music education and a love for the people that go into it that I'm always looking for ways to help them get their foot in the door. And then, we're always getting to know each other. I think it's important though that you let people see who you are and work to express that as honestly as you possibly can. So I'm being a little bit evasive here. My apologies for that, but your initial impression is important. And I can't state enough how the public school education is a conservative institution. And you have to understand that people that are hiring you are not looking for someone that's going to be high maintenance. They want someone who can be independent, but who can also be a team player, someone who can lead people forward, who can be an inspiration to them, could be contemporary in a young teacher, but also can instill some traditional values. So you are absolutely welcome to present yourself however way you want. And in today's day and age, tattoos are just not a big deal. But I think if you've got sleeves or a collar, that you're running the risk of being overlooked, particularly if the people making decisions are more conservative than you might be. Now, is there anything deceptive about wearing a long sleeve shirt and a jacket with a collar? Nope, nothing at all. And again, I want to go on record by saying that I have no problem with these expressions. I have no problem with gauges, piercings, tattoos. But as I shared with some of you in the session earlier today, when I had the mom look at me way back when I was a young teacher with a beard, and she thought that somehow that beard was off-putting, just crazy stuff. But that's kind of the world we're living in. So we want to put our best foot forward, if you want to say that. But also just to be as inviting and as appealing to as broad a cross-section of our population as we can, because the more kids we reach, the more kids we can teach. So dress professionally for the interview, dress conservatively. We're in a time now where the handshake has become very taboo. And it's funny because I found myself recently in a situation where I was actually in a social encounter, and it was in preparation for a workshop, and I just instinctively reached out my hand to shake it. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, we're not doing that right now. But looking back to a time prior to 4 months ago, and what we all hope will be ahead, the handshake is an important thing, and because it shows confidence, it shows congeniality. A firm handshake is always appreciated by most. However, I will share something with you that's a little bit of a conservative value of mine. I was born into a conservative family in the Deep South, and I grew up in a yes ma'am, no sir household, which I'm grateful for. But I learned some rules of etiquette early on, and that is that when a gentleman introduces himself to a lady, we're talking about the strict rules of etiquette and maybe days gone by, but as a show of respect, you wait for the lady to extend her hand before you do yours, just as a gesture of respect. I'm not sure how that conveys respect, but that's what I was taught. And to this day, I still kind of do that. So with the gentleman, I reach out, offer my hand. If there's a lady, just out of courtesy, I sometimes will hesitate unless she offers her first. So please don't hate me for saying that. I don't mean that to sound like a sexist remark. I do it as a courtesy. In fact, I'm a little bit more cautious about that now than ever, for obvious reasons. So make eye contact and smile. I'm concerned that this online platform that we find ourselves in, I'm looking right now at the center of my screen, but that probably means I'm not looking at you. So in my effort to, especially with Zoom conferences, when I look at the person I'm speaking to, chances are I'm not looking in their eyes. So it's kind of looking forward to the time when we can get back to seeing somebody face to face and actually make eye contact. But the way, again, just a simple smile, eye contact, and when you greet them with a handshake, making eye contact at that same time shows warmth, but it also shows confidence. It's a subtle expression of your confidence. Have multiple hard copies of your resume and reference list with you. Have more than you think you need, and be prepared to distribute them at the beginning of the interview. They may already have just copied and distributed them already. So but you want to have some as a backup. You don't need to go out and get super expensive paper, but it is nice if your resume is on a piece of paper that is substantial, that looks like nice stationery, but again, it doesn't have to be very expensive. I would suggest that when you're crafting your resume and your reference list, that you not use a lot of colored fonts or artwork, because when those get duplicated and distributed, but not in your presence, well, then you never know what the quality of those images are going to be like. And oftentimes, art images and light colored ink does not copy well, and then your resume ends up looking sort of substandard. So bring your own, but I would say don't invest a whole lot of energy in the artistic components of your resume. Just let it speak to who you are. Sometimes less is more, and this is one of those cases when I believe it is. Have your resources ready. It's okay to keep notebooks with you in a backpack, or maybe in some sort of a satchel, where you can, if you're asked about pedagogy, you can say, well, here's my woodwind pedagogy book, here's my percussion pedagogy book, here's my string pedagogy notes, so that you're able to show that you actually do have information readily available should they ask you questions, or if you were in a classroom setting, that you'd be able to have ready access to. You might have examples of some honors you have received, perhaps something that will support your resume, documentation of a scholarship or some sort of a particular honor. Perhaps if you went to a chamber music competition, like MENC hosts or those kinds of events, anything that shows that what you've done goes above and beyond what might have been expected. I recommend that you take notes on a good old-fashioned legal pad rather than an iPad or personal computer. With personal devices being so multi-platform in terms of communication, people sometimes see the computer and it puts a little bit of distance. So I'll share something that happened with me. It's been quite a while now, but I was in a faculty meeting and I had my laptop open and I was taking copious notes about this presentation we were given. Unbeknownst to me, there was one of my colleagues, a woman who was about, I'd say 15 years my senior. She was just infuriated that I was sitting there on my computer, blatantly disregarding the information that was being presented by the speaker. And so she actually came over and confronted me about it and says, told me, I can't believe you'd sit here on your computer during a session like this. And I basically just wrote to her, I said, I'm just taking notes. But so her mindset was, you take notes on a pad. My mindset was, I'm taking notes on my computer. Why? Because I have the handwriting of a serial killer and I can't read my own handwriting sometimes, but I can type faster and more accurately than I can write many times. So that's what I default to. But it just went to show me that people bring their own paradigm with them, their own perceptions of those things. And so I tend to err on the side of conservative and caution when it comes to those kinds of things. If you don't know the answer to something, it's really okay to say, I don't remember the two different fingerings for oboe on F. I forgot. It's okay to say those things, be honest. But you can also say, I don't recall that fingering, but I know where to find it. And that's when you have your resources handy. Or, my mentor on oboe is Donna Schmidt. So anytime I've got a question about oboe pedagogy or reeds or tone quality, range, intonation, she is my go-to. And she's always right there. And by the way, that is a true story. She is my go-to for the oboe. Flip any perceived shortcomings to your advantage. Sometimes things don't go as smoothly as we would like. But as I mentioned earlier today, if you are someone who took a long time to get your undergraduate degree like I did, then the way I flip that in the interview is that I have so much more experience observing great teachers because it took me so much longer to graduate, that I have some real world experience that most first year teachers don't bring with them. And as someone who is on the brink of turning 25, that's a big difference between being 21 or 22. So I bring a little bit more maturity with me than maybe most of other first year teachers. So whatever those shortcomings are, work to flip them to your advantage, because I have yet to find a situation short of being, convicted of some sort of ethics crime. Usually it's kind of hard to flip something you've done that's morally objectionable. But when it comes to school and experience and timeline, those kinds of things, we could almost always find a way to take something and turn it into an asset rather than a liability. Go to the district website. Do they have a mission statement? Do they have any documentation there that will give you buzzwords, keywords, phrases that you can then work into your interview to show alignment? I'll give you a great example. When I was teaching in Houston in the Cypress Fairbanks School District, we had something called the Profile of a Cy-Fair ISD Graduate. And it was about 10 or 12 things that described what we wanted our graduates to look like. Well, I found that before I interviewed for the job. And I worked a number of those into my interview responses. And I even, on one occasion, made reference to it. Say, well, I understand, I recall from seeing on the website that one of the goals for a Cy-Fair ISD graduate is this. So that works in beautifully with my experience, because when I was student teaching, I had that very situation. And so then I could show my experience through the lens that they've already created for me. When you conclude the interview, there's a little bit of an art to that as well. It's important that you not leave that room until you have said everything you want them to hear about you. Sometimes their questions won't always reveal the depth of your experience or your understanding or your ambition, that kind of thing. So before the interview is over, it is perfectly acceptable to say, before we wrap up, would you mind if I share one or two things with you? And if they say, I'm sorry, we've got another interview, then you don't push it, you let it go. And then we'll talk about how you might follow up with that. But you don't want to leave the interview wishing you had said something that you didn't. So it's okay to be an advocate for yourself, certainly in that regard. So when is it okay to discuss salary? Generally, I recommend that you don't discuss salary until you get the job offer. Now, most school districts have posted on their websites somewhere a salary schedule, and usually it's posted as for a bachelor's degree, master's degree, or a doctorate, and there's different scales depending on different levels of experience. So that's where you can usually find your base salary. But most of us as music teachers end up getting some supplemental pay because of the extra time that we put in and the extra projects, the responsibilities that we have to assume. So that information isn't always as easily found on the website. So you might have to do a little investigation through other ways, but I would be reluctant to discuss salary until such time as you've gotten the offer. Now, if you wanted to bring that subject up, you might say something like, I saw the salary schedule on the website and that all looks great, but I was just wondering, is there a stipend or any sort of supplement for music teachers? I think that's okay, but you just want to avoid the perception that it's all about the money. And I don't think most of us have to worry about that, but you don't, perception is everything. So just be delicate when you discuss those things. Something else to keep in mind too, and this is really not a negotiating point because as teachers, we really don't negotiate our contracts, but there are extra days and then there are stipends. Now, the typical school year teacher is on a 187-day contract or something kind of like that. And that means that you've got a daily rate. That means they take your annual salary and divide that by 187 days, and that gives you your daily rate or whatever the number of days are. Now, that does not generally include your stipend. So if the stipend is, say, like $3,000, well, if you get a raise from the school district, that's usually based upon your daily rate. So a 3% raise would only apply to those 187 days. It would not apply to the stipend necessarily. But some school districts don't do stipends, they just do extra days. So instead of being on a 187-day contract, you might be on a 210-day contract or something like that. And that means extra days. When the salary goes up, then all those days go up. So in some ways, depending on the way things are set up, you might want to do the math, but a stipend might not be as advantageous as extra days. Now, I only mention that if you should find yourself in the luxurious position of getting to compare offers. And if you've got two places that both seem like great fits, then maybe you look at what the numbers actually come down to. And I think that's okay. I mean, there is a pragmatic side to this too. Yes, we are all teachers. We're all inspired to do that, but there's also the practical side of it, which I think is perfectly okay to consider. So when is it okay? Is it okay to ask when a decision will be made? Absolutely. Save that for the very end as you're concluding the interview and say, is there a timeline for deciding when a decision would be made? Is there another level, another round of interviews? Those are okay things to ask. Just ask them like you're seeking information, not like you're making a demand. That's important. Now, if you're offered the job, you're typically entitled to 24 hours to consider the offer. I'm going to share a story with you. I had a young teacher not too long ago interviewed for a job, and this job was actually done over by interview, long distance. He made the long drive down for the actual in-person interview, but his immediate supervisor wasn't there. His immediate supervisor, this is in the summer, was on the phone. And this guy got the job offer, but it was in a very hurried sort of, it was not in a very concerned and thoughtful manner. And so he was told that they would like to have him make a decision by 5 o'clock that afternoon. So he gets back in his car and starts driving to the next back home. But then he gets a phone call and saying, hey, we need a decision within an hour. Now, that seems a little bit suspicious. And to him, all of a sudden, it seemed like a red flag. So that sort of not being there in person, pushing for an answer immediately before you have a chance to discuss this with your family. Those are all things that are kind of maybe red flags. So typically you're entitled to 24 hours. Now, if you need more time, say you've got another interview set up, it's absolutely okay to say, if they say, we'll let you know within, or can you let us know within 24 hours? You might say, I've already got another interview scheduled for Friday. Is it possible for you to wait until then? Because I would like to honor their offer to interview me before I make a decision. And that's really okay too. But again, you have to feel that out. If this is a job that you know you want, then by gosh, take it. If you think there might be something else out there that's that might be a better fit, then ask the question. So again, this is all about kind of getting a sense, feeling out the personalities in the room, that type of thing. I see we've got a couple of questions in the room. One is, where were you able to view the Dropbox? I think there was an email that went out prior to this event that actually had the link to the Dropbox folder in it. If you will give me just 1 second here, I am going to send you all a link to a place that has absolutely every presentation I'm doing at CSI. I'll give that to you right now. So give me just a moment. And I'm going to put that in the chat room and you can have at it. Boom. There we go. So help yourself to that link, and that has all the presentations I'm doing and the materials relevant to them. See another question here. Danielle says, just joining in, have you discussed Zoom interviews and camera angles and lighting? Sorry if I missed that. No, I did not discuss that. And thank you, because I have a light here that I just now turned on. Thank you for the reminder, Danielle. So I actually have got this set up specifically to do Zoom presentations and that kind of thing. So yes, I would suggest that you set things up, test it. You want light coming from the front, not behind you, and maybe down just a little bit, but not to create shadows. So I've got a light. If you can see the angle of my hand, there's a light right there, slightly above. And you kind of want to avoid this kind of stuff too, where your head is in the lower third. You want your eyes to be in the upper third of the screen. That way people can see a little bit more of you. It just feels a little bit more like you're present. And I want to encourage all of you, if you have any questions you want to enter into that chat window, feel free to do that at your convenience. It would be a help if you would flag them as questions. There's a little button you can click that will turn red and tell me that you actually have a question. That way I can be sure to get to those. So, follow-up questions. If you're offered the job, you should have a list of questions you might want to ask at that point. And you want to identify the deal breakers. For instance, I'm very uncomfortable with the notion of driving a school bus because my days are very long. There are times when I would drive home from school and I would be just sleepy. And the idea of having 40 kids on a bus is a little bit more responsibility than I was comfortable taking on. So for me, driving a bus as part of the job might have been a deal breaker. I can't say that for sure, but for some people, they might have to teach choir in addition to teaching orchestra. And if you feel like your skill set doesn't allow for you to do a good job with that, that might be a deal breaker for you too. So think in advance, what are the things that would be the deal breakers? Maybe you would be asked to supervise a period of in-school suspension every day, or you might have to do some other sort of duty. Now, the truth is, all of us have to participate in those responsibilities that are school-wide, whether it's sometimes monitoring the halls, being out by the buses from time to time, proctoring tests, monitoring in-school suspension. Those are things that sometimes we have to do that's part of the school environment. So don't get your head in too much of a twist about some of those things. But if your job description is every day you're going to teach 2 periods of in-school suspension in addition to 3 periods of music, that balance may be something you want to consider. So Matthew Cotton says, are there any questions that you usually ask when the interviewer asks you, do you have any questions for us? How do you approach that time? Well, some of the questions if they said, do you have any questions for us? I might say, well, what would my day look like? And what would the schedule look like? But you want to be quick to add that you are not in all intimidated by long hours. You might even preface it by saying, I'm a get up early, stay up late kind of guy. And so hours don't intimidate me, but I was wondering if maybe you could give me an idea of what my day would look like. Will I travel between campuses? Will I team teach? Will I be the only person in the room at the time, or will there be someone? Will I have a mentor? Will there be an assistant? Those are some things you might consider asking as part of the wrap up. Ashley asks, what are some go-to questions you recommend asking at the interview? Well, that seems to be the hot question there. So I actually have some interview questions I'm going to share with you when we get to the end of this presentation. With any luck, some of those will be in there as well. But again, anything that I might not answer for you as part of this very brief presentation, I sure hope you'll email me and give me an opportunity to respond after the fact. I'm trying to think of some other questions that I might ask, though, right at the as things were wrapping up. Perhaps something, would there be an opportunity for me to sponsor any clubs that might not necessarily be specific to music? For instance, when I was my first 10 years of teaching, for a few years, I sponsored the triathlon club. And I had a blast doing that. I got to know a bunch of kids outside of band, and that helped change their perception of what band was about, because here's this guy that's sponsoring the triathlon club. So maybe ask some questions like that. Look at people who have jobs that you would like to have, people you admire, thinking that's what I want to do. And then maybe let that be a starting point for you to craft those kinds of questions. So be prepared to accept or decline the offer if they call. If those 24 hours have elapsed and they call you and say, we'd like you to, have you made a decision? That's when you really need to accept or decline the offer. So, and truth is, very few of us end up having our first job for our entire lives. Most of the time, we will find ourselves switching campuses or towns. Certainly, if your personal life changes, you get married, things like that, then I've got a very good friend. His wife is a doctor. She just got her residency in Missouri, and they were living in Oklahoma. So guess what? He's now going to be a band director in Missouri. That's perfectly fine. But those are the kinds of things that you want to kind of anticipate as well. But I guess what I'm getting at here is, don't think that any decision you make as a young teacher is going to necessarily be a disaster. I rarely see that kind of thing. So, and again, if your network is strong, we've always got our resources. So let's talk a little bit about the follow-up. Following the interview, it's perfectly okay to follow up with an email to the appropriate parties, the decision makers in the room. Now, sometimes you'll interview with just 2 or 3 people. Sometimes you may find you're interviewing with a whole lot of people, especially when you get maybe a little bit older and you start to apply for a job that's very maybe high profile, or one that carries a lot of responsibility, where you might be a coordinator of fine arts, that kind of thing. You might find yourself in front of a large panel. But yes, it's okay to email them, express gratitude, be concise in your follow-up, address people personally. Dear Dr. Mamiga, dear Dr. Smith, whatever it is, send a personal note. But be concise, be literate, please. Spell, check your grammar, punctuate, understand what contractions are for, things like that. Because your written communication says so much about who you are, your attention to detail. And one of the best ways to improve that is just to read. I do a lot of student leadership workshops, and I almost always have kids read aloud at some point. And it's very revealing, because I find that they're not as good readers as we might think. They don't see sentences or words in groups. They see them as individual collections of letters, and that's not how we communicate. So I recommend, as a teacher, read recreationally, read for professional purposes as well. Express gratitude in your follow-up email. Don't gush, just grateful for the opportunity to have met with them. And regardless of the outcome, you look forward to your association in the future. Because, if you're, again, the job only goes to one person, and there's probably going to be a pool of applicants that they're considering. Again, you're building relationships, express gratitude, and that, and then if you should not get the job, following up with another email. Thank you so much for considering me. I hope you'll keep me in mind if a position should open in the future. Again, all about relationships. Express an enthusiasm and anticipation for the next steps. And it's okay at the end of that email to say, it was wonderful getting to meet everyone. I look forward to hearing from you soon. That's absolutely okay. You're not demanding anything. You're not telling them they have to call you. I look forward to sunny weather. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Same kind of thing. In your follow-up letter, don't offer additional qualifications. That's what the interview is for. Now, the only time you would offer additional qualifications is if at the end of the interview, you ask to share a few things that you didn't get to, and they say, I'm sorry, we're out of time. Then in your follow-up email, you might thank them, be grateful, all that, but then say, unfortunately, time constraints prevented us from discussing a couple more of my attributes, such as this and this. I'd be happy to elaborate on those at your request, and leave it at that. You do not want to create an additional burden. You don't want to seem high pressure. You're there to express gratitude and to open yourself up to whatever they need to make an informed decision. Here are a few things you might want to avoid. Never burn a bridge. Our profession is small, and there's just no upside to being a jerk. There's no upside to being negative. As a young teacher, I got caught in with some of my colleagues being rather negative. And there's an expression, you chop somebody else's head off to make you taller. We don't need to do that. We've got to support each other. And I don't mean to pontificate right now, but in these times, right now, we have to make ourselves more relevant than ever, because what we do is so difficult to replicate in an online format. We teach ensembles. If you saw the Canadian brass presentation around the noon hour today, they were talking about chamber music. Chamber music is something we all better be prepared to embrace in a very aggressive, thoughtful, and carefully planned manner. Because if we cannot get together in large ensembles, then our relevance is only reinforced. Our value is only reinforced if we find some other place to be valuable. So that means we must embrace the idea of chamber music and social distancing while still doing ensembles. So I'm not sure how I got off on never burn a bridge. I guess it's just the idea there that they were always building relationships. And I know what it was. I was participating in this kind of trash talk, and there's just no upside to that. There's no benefit to cutting people down. We have to stay together. We have to work toward a common goal. We've got to prove our relevance en masse as fine arts teachers, not just music, and certainly not just band. It's got to be, we're all pushing for the importance of fine arts. When you're in the interview, avoid asking about the program goals or where they see the program in the future. I've had interview candidates do mock interviews with me, and they question me on this. Why can't you ask about the program goals? Well, let's say that the program is in a rebuilding process, and maybe their contest ratings haven't been as high, or the numbers have dropped for whatever reason. If you say, well, so what's the plan for getting the numbers back up? Or is there a plan in place for improving the ratings? Those are really questions that you should not be asking as a subordinate. Those are things that you're hired to help improve. So they might ask you, how can you help contribute to the program? What can you do to help us on this path? We're in a regrowth period right now. Tell me what you can do to help us increase our numbers, to help us improve our chamber festival ratings. Tell me what you can do to help us navigate these social distancing waters until we return to a full ensemble setting. Those are great things for you to consider. And again, if you want to talk about flipping negatives into positives, whatever you did to make it through these last 3 months at college, whether it was observing classes online, watching videos, participating in symposia, attending something like this, document these things. Because as a student, so much of the time, you're waiting for people to tell you what to do. You want to show evidence that you've taken initiative, because that's what people are looking for in these times. People that are creative in their thinking, that are not going to settle for what's the hand they're dealt. We've got to look for ways to get beyond that. So here are a few questions and topics that you might anticipate when you are in the interview. They're going to say, tell me about yourself, your teaching experiences, and what led you here. Why do you want to come teach in our school district? And that's where it'd be great to know a little bit about the school district, about the community, about the reputation, and about the people you will work with. Because if you can show a desire to work with those people and that you already are familiar with the community, that's going to really help get your foot in the door. What are some adjectives you might use to describe your teaching? Be concise and avoid saying, well, let me think. Think about those up front. And by the way, all these questions I'm sampling from right now, you'll find them in that Dropbox folder that I sent you a link to. How do you motivate students? Wow, that's a tough one. How do you motivate students? In a typical class, what would I expect to see on a daily basis? And how do you organize a class? Now, your question in response to that might be, tell me what class I would be teaching. Am I teaching a beginning flute class? Is this a junior high saxophone class or junior high second band? Then you can tailor your answer to that. What's your expectation for after-school rehearsals? What about sectionals or additional performances? How do you get students to be excited about learning? Here's a great question. What is the most important responsibility of a junior high band, orchestra, or choir teacher? And the knee-jerk response is, well, to get kids to love music, to help develop them to better people, to help make them responsible citizens. Yes, yes, yes. But we also have an obligation to teach them the music too. And your number one job, if you're teaching middle school, band or orchestra or choir, is get them to the high school. That's your job. And if you're in an interview and they ask you that question, or you can somehow work in there that you believe that as a team player, your job is get those kids to high school, that's going to make you stand out. Because the fact is, particularly in orchestra and band, when we start with them in 5th or 6th grade, all we can do is lose them along the way. In choir, we can occasionally discover someone that we didn't know was out there, a great singer that was undiscovered. But we just don't discover some great French horn player who just happens to go to our school that we didn't know about. So we have to be, and speaking as a junior high band director, because I was one, we must get kids to the high school. And that means you have to prepare them for the demands there, both musically and socially. And here's the other part of that too. When kids are thinking about the next step, they're working harder at whatever they're doing right then and there. We don't want them to coast. We don't want them to get near the end and start to let up. If those kids in 8th grade are thinking about high school and preparing for that, they're working much harder for you all the way to the end of their 8th grade year. And that sets a great example for your younger band members. So I'm looking at the chat window. I don't see any additional questions at this point. So I'm going to let you peruse the acknowledgments here. And again, to restate, I'm so excited about making connections with all of you. Again, tomorrow afternoon and evening, 2-part session, questions you're afraid to ask. The Google Doc is waiting for you to submit those questions anonymously. Love to hear from you. And we've got a great panel to address those things. So looking forward to that. I'm going to allow you all a little extra time here, maybe chill before your next session. And again, thank you. Stay in touch.